The Green Bay Packers might actually be back, and there's one person to thank: Jordan Love. Despite being 2-5 heading into week 8, they now sit at 6-6 and have a legitimate chance to make the playoffs. And over the course of the last 3 weeks, they beat the LA Chargers, the Detroit Lions, and the Kansas City Chiefs. So is this random stretch of really good football a random stretch of really good football, or is it genuinely who they are moving forward? And the big question really coming from this is Jordan Love really that guy? Well, I will be answering those questions plus some more about this Green Bay Packers team. So without further ado, let's get into it. And I think the best way to start this video off is just by basically covering Jordan Love and his trajectory currently. Because on the season, he has 2,866 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. However, if you take away his most recent 3-game stretch, the numbers aren't quite as nice. Because prior to this 3-game stretch, he had 2,009 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And furthermore, if you take away his weeks 1 and 2 performance where he had a really good stretch of games as well, he had a total of 8 touchdowns and 10 interceptions between the games of New Orleans Saints all the way up to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's kind of been a tale of two stories for Jordan Love. Sometimes he plays great, sometimes he plays bad. And while that is of course to be expected from a young quarterback like Jordan Love, is this kind of the trajectory that we are going to expect him to continue to go down? Is he going to continue to play really well? Is he going to continue to play inconsistent? What's the truth about Jordan Love? And while currently it's very hard to say where that trajectory might be going, I do think he's going down the right path. Ultimately, we have to understand, he's a 1-year starter. The kid does not have a ton of experience, and currently, he's been playing some pretty good ball. And I think the most impressive thing about this, he's playing good football against really good teams. Had he went out there and beat up on a team like the Atlanta Falcons or the Chicago Bears or some of these really bad teams like the Carolina Panthers, I don't think I'd be that impressed, but he's doing this against really good defenses. The Kansas City Chiefs have arguably the best defense in the entire NFL, and he put 267 passing yards on them and 3 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And he outdueled Patrick Mahomes. Now, what's interesting about Jordan Love is the narrative that's going to be following around him is that he's going to be an inconsistent player. And while that's going to be very true, that's kind of what we should be expecting from a first-year starter. There are not many first-year starters that came in instantly and were immediately impactful players. Look at a guy like Jalen Hurts. He was pretty bad his first year. And the same can be said for about 90% of NFL starters to this day. So I think Jordan Love is actually projecting to have a very solid career if this is how he's going to go. Obviously, it's super hard to predict where Jordan Love is going to go because obviously, like I've been saying this whole video, it's been kind of inconsistent to start this season off. It's not like he's going on long stretches of really good play. His longest stretch of really good play is his current one with the past 3 games. And it's hard to deny the fact that he was horrible, or I don't want to say horrible, but really not that great between the New Orleans Saints games all the way up to this most recent Steelers game. Now let's be abundantly clear. This Green Bay Packers team is not the most talented roster out there. They have a decent defense with some good offensive linemen who typically can't stay healthy to go along with a very, very, very young receiving core. And I do think that is definitely a part of the development of Jordan Love. He doesn't really have reliable weapons right now. His most reliable weapon is arguably Romeo Doubs or Jalen Reed, and they're both 1-2-year starters. It's not like this guy has a bunch of veteran receivers like a DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, so on and so forth. He has a very young receiving core that is not really phenomenal right now. This is a team that has a very complex system. Obviously, with Aaron Rodgers being the predecessor, it's going to be a system that he's going to have to adopt, and I think right now he's doing a pretty fine job at it. I think when this team can stay on schedule and run the RPOs, run the ball effectively, rely on Jordan Love to make these big, fantastic throws here and there, they can find success. But at the end of the day, I do have my concern if this team was to fall off schedule, potentially get behind, if they can maintain that pace. Of course, if you do your job properly, that would never happen, but you kind of get my point. At the end of the day, they just beat 2 of the best teams in the NFL, the Detroit Lions and the Kansas City Chiefs. And while I don't think Jordan Love can carry this team to being a very legitimate contender, if he can get them to the playoffs, that would be a huge milestone for him. How many first-year starters have taken their teams into the playoffs, especially after being 2-5? Because you look at a lot of the great rookie quarterbacks who had great rookie seasons. Let's look at a guy like Dak Prescott or Ben Roethlisberger. They didn't go very far, and I don't expect Jordan Love to go very far either. But with those teams, they had very talented rosters around them. This is not an extremely talented roster, if we're being completely honest with each other. So while I'm not going to say that Jordan Love is going to be the next Ben Roethlisberger or Tony Romo or any of these young quarterbacks who had really good rookie seasons, I do think that this is a guy who could potentially be a very good quarterback. Is he the second coming of Aaron Rodgers? Probably not, because that's an extremely, extremely hard tail to follow. But if Jordan Love can continue to progress into becoming the player that we think he can be, the talent is through the roof. He can be a great quarterback because he has the accuracy, he has the throwing motion, he has everything that you want in a quarterback. It's just inconsistent right now. So hypothetically, let's say that he ends the season off looking just like he is right now. That will be an incredible rookie season for him, especially if this team was somehow able to make the playoffs. And if he can keep this pace up going into next year and then somehow progress to be even better next year, that would be an incredible start to a very, very young career. Sitting behind Aaron Rodgers might be one of the best things that could ever happen to a young quarterback, and I think that that is the case for a guy like Jordan Love. The Packers have a system. They get a quarterback who's a star. Once he's getting older, they draft a new one or they get one in free agency. He sits behind them for a few years, and then eventually he becomes the star. And that's kind of looking like how it's going to continue with the guy in Jordan Love. Now, moving on from Jordan Love, obviously the team as a whole has been playing a lot better as of late. The run game has gotten going with guys like AJ Dillon and hopefully a guy in Aaron Jones who can come back and eventually make some plays as well. Their trio of young receivers in Romeo Doubs, Jayden Reed, and Christian Watson are getting better and better as time is going on, and it also feels like their connection with Jordan Love is also getting better and better. The tight end room, led by guys like Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, is going to be very good. I do hope that Luke Musgrave can come back and eventually get that connection going with Jordan Love. The offensive line is playing better as of late. It's still not an incredible unit, but they do have some injuries to guys like David Bakhtiari, which hopefully he can come back eventually. They do give up some sacks, and they aren't the best in terms of run blocking and pass protection, but they are a decent unit that I think has some potential to eventually be really good if they can get healthy and acquire a couple more talented players. And of course, defensively, they have a bunch of talent basically on every position. I wouldn't say it's one of the better units in the NFL, as I don't think it's a very complete unit, but I do have a bunch of really, really good players here and there. It is a unit that is a little bit on the older side, led by guys like Jair Alexander, Quay Walker, Devondre Campbell, Preston Smith, Kenny Clark, kind of older guys. I wouldn't say these are aging superstars or nothing like that, but eventually they are going to get a little bit older. I do think the one thing that needs maybe the most attention is going to be the secondary. I don't really love Carrington Valentine, nor do I really like Rudy Ford. I do think this is a unit that is okay, but it does need some new influx of young talent. But statistically speaking, they actually perform pretty well. They give up the 9th most points per game, only giving up 20.3 points per game. They rank about middle of the yard in terms of how much yards they give up per game. And for the most part, they rank usually between the top 10 to top 20 in most statistical categories that matter. So this is not a unit that's like the San Francisco 49ers or Baltimore Ravens or nothing like that, but they definitely can keep their team within the game. And this is a defense that, as long as the offense is performing fine, they typically can hold up their end of the bargain. So if this team was to hypothetically make that next jump offensively, I think this defense is Super Bowl caliber. And of course, I like their head coach a lot. I think Matt LaFleur gets a lot of shit sometimes, but I do think he's one of the better coaches in the league. I think his ability to make the most of the young talent that he does have is pretty impressive. And I do think over the course of the last couple weeks, he's definitely flexed his muscles a little bit. Is he a top 5 coach of the league? Probably not. Is he top 10, top 15? I'd say so. So I think when you look at the future of this team, they're kind of looking nice. Do I think they have a bunch of superstars upcoming? Probably not superstars, but they definitely have a couple of stars in the making. I think if Jordan Love can continue to progress year in and year out, he might become a superstar at one point. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jayden Reed all have supreme talent, and if they can maximize it, they can be really good players. I think as long as this team can effectively draft well, fix up some pieces on the offensive line as well as in the secondary, this team can eventually become a very, very, very formidable foe. And as a whole, looking at the future of the division, there's a lot of really good teams. The Detroit Lions are obviously the hardest team that they're going to have to continue to go up against, and eventually teams like the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears will figure out their roster and eventually start to contend for playoff spots. So if you're Green Bay, I do think you do have a bit of a head start in front of those teams. Obviously, Detroit Lions are obviously the best team, and they're going to continue to be the best team moving forward, but if Green Bay can continue to get that progression to get better and better, who knows? Now, moving away from the super far future and kind of looking at more of their immediate future, their schedule coming up is ridiculously easy. I'm not kidding when I say this. They have a very, very good chance of becoming 11-6. Their last 5 games are against the New York Giants, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Carolina Panthers, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Chicago Bears. And the best quarterback they're going to be going up against is arguably either Baker Mayfield or Justin Fields. Those teams right there suck. I mean, the Buccaneers are okay. The Minnesota Vikings are a better unit now than they were maybe a couple weeks ago, but let's be honest, they're not very good. And with Green Bay looking like a really good roster, if they can somehow win out and go 11-6, what a effing season for them. From 2-5 to 11-6 and making the playoffs with a young, basically rookie quarterback, what a story. Do I think that's how it's going to go out? Probably not. I think they'll maybe lose 1 or 2 games here and there. But regardless, if they can somehow make the playoffs with this roster, that would be very, very impressive. So let's kind of cap things off really with a nice little note on this Green Bay Packers team. Young future quarterback, young trio of receivers, a veteran defense that is capable of winning a Super Bowl, and maybe most importantly, an experienced coaching staff that knows what they're doing. That right there is a ton of keys to success. Now, if they can actually get that progression from their star receivers and young star quarterback, then maybe we can get to the point where they might become serious contenders. Because if you look at the landscape of the NFC as a whole, outside of the Detroit Lions and maybe the 49ers and Eagles, there are a lot of older teams within this conference. And even furthermore, you look at the quarterbacks in this conference, there's not a lot of really good ones. Outside of Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, and Brock Purdy, it's not very good. And with Dak Prescott being well into his 30s, it's really just Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts, and potentially Jordan Love. Obviously, we just kind of have to wait and see if guys like Bryce Young, Justin Fields, and some of these other younger quarterbacks within the conference can take that next step. But right now, with the way it's looking, Jordan Love looks like the most promising young quarterback within the NFC, unless I'm missing somebody, but I don't think I am. Unless you consider Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy young quarterbacks, which they are young quarterbacks, but you kind of get my point. So with all that being said, the Green Bay Packers have a bright future, but can they maximize that potential and get to that point where they are one of the better teams within the future? I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. But what I do have the answers to is that I'm very excited about the Green Bay Packers, and I'm sure some Packers fans are feeling pretty optimistic themselves. But that will wrap up my portion of the video. If you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because it would help me out a ton, as well as share this video to all your friends and family who may also enjoy NFL and NBA content. But I love you guys. Peace.